Welcome to Australian Book Review's podcast. My name's Peter Rose, and I'm the editor of Australian Book Review. It's day 3 of ABR's first US tour, and it finds us in Washington. Just yesterday, I was chatting to ABR's regular theatre critic, Ian Dickson, who's on the tour, about the great Edward Albee and productions of his that we'd both enjoyed. This morning, I read about his death, aged 88. Edward Albee, of course, was the author of magnificent plays such as A Delicate Balance, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and Three Tall Women. He won 3 Pulitzer Prizes for drama and should have won a 4th if the organisers had observed the judges' preference for him to receive it for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf in 1962. Albee, as I say, was 88 when he died, but for me, he remained the enfant terrible of American theatre, always the iconoclast, the outsider, the scourge of conventional expectations of what drama might do. Here he is speaking about theatre. All plays, if they're any good, are constructed as correctives. That's the job of the writer, holding that mirror up to people. We're not merely decorative, pleasant and safe. Ian Dickson, is this how you think of Albee's contribution?
Absolutely, and I would say that it's the problem he had and also his salvation as an artist. And I think a lot of major American playwrights have gone the same way. You can look at Williams and Miller and maybe even Tony Kushner now, who've had huge successes at the beginning of their career, so that Broadway producers are wanting to produce their later work, which can sometimes be much more complex, which then doesn't get audiences or indeed critics, and they go into a bit of a decline. And I think that happened with Albee. And what's interesting is that some of those middle plays, say All Over, Seascape, The Lady from Dubuque, which hardly lasted on Broadway at all, have had some really interesting revivals off Broadway in the last 10 years or so.
In a way, he may have been almost cursed by that extraordinary success.
Absolutely.
After the off-Broadway success of The Zoo Story, his first Broadway play in his early 30s, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, has this phenomenal success, runs for a year and a half, and then is followed by an equally great play, I think, A Delicate Balance.
Probably even more great play. I think it's probably denser than Virginia Woolf. Though Virginia Woolf, of course, has the amazing roles that actors will always want to play.
Yes, and then becomes almost a kind of persona non grata, wasn't he?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, for several years after that. And it's because, as I say, these plays were much more challenging in a way, because he was moving towards surrealism. For example, Seascape is a play which has 2 human beings and 2 English-speaking lizards in it. It's a fascinating play, but it certainly didn't work very long on Broadway. And The Lady from Dubuque, which is a devastating play about death, only had about 12 performances on Broadway, I think, even though the great Irene Worth was starring in it.
Do you think that rather dark view of the human condition began to alienate modern audiences? I mean, the great New Yorker critic John Lahr wrote of him that Albee is not a fan of mankind. And here is Albee again on his own work. All of my plays are about people missing the boat, closing down too young, coming in the end of their lives with regret at things not done as opposed to things done. I find most people spend too much time living as if they're never going to die. A remarkably pessimistic view.
Definitely, yes, but also there's a huge amount of humour in most of his plays, and I think several of the original productions missed that totally, and I think that was part of the problem with them, that the audience just didn't get that really, really dark humour that is there. And I think probably maybe in the 70s, American audiences weren't attuned to that sort of humour.
Enviably, you've seen many of the plays, many more than I have. What for you were some of the great productions?
Well, I was very lucky when I was very young to see the original cast of Virginia Woolf, which was brought over to London. And Jutta Hagen's performance is one that I will never forget. I mean, it's lucky for people that they did record that entire production, and it comes across very, very strongly. But the thing I remember most about her, as a whatever I was, 15-year-old boy, here was this woman who was not a classic beauty, and it is probably the most sexually powerful performance I've ever seen. It was just extraordinary, and Arthur Hill balanced her all the way.
And there's an audio recording of that, isn't there?
Indeed,
but no film
visual,
version.
Alas, no.
Yeah. About 15 years ago, I was lucky enough to see a marvellous production of A Delicate Balance, which I think you saw too, with Eileen Atkins as Agnes and Maggie Smith, and a fine cast all round. There was a tweak going on in this production, wasn't there?
There was indeed, because... and I still am not quite sure exactly what happened, but there was a speech at the end that was originally given to Agnes and got shifted, much to Eileen Atkins' disapproval, to Maggie Smith towards the end of the rehearsal period. And Albee was quite happy with that. So it's as though, I guess, Atkins said quite rightly, you know, if you shift from one to another, what's the whole idea of developing character and everything? But I think for Albee, it was more a question of the theme was so strong that this could be moved to another character and it wouldn't harm the play.
Wow. That's a very unusual concession from Albee, who was, like Beckett, renowned for his fierce control over productions.
Yes. But this was his idea, I think.
Oh, right.
So,
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting, of course, with Delicate Balance, because if you have a really strong actress playing Claire, she can walk away with the play. And just before the production that you're talking about, there was one done in New York with Eileen Stritch playing the role, and she was hilarious but outrageous and gave no quarter to any of the other actors at all.
The understanding of Albee's greatness and contribution has been greatly aided by some fantastic film versions. Just flying to America 10 days ago, I watched for about the 50th time the 66 version of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which marked Mike Nichols' precocious film debut, and fantastic performances by Burton and Taylor, perhaps her best on film to my mind. Do you like that version? I
do, but of course I still have the Jutta Hagen in the back of my mind. But yes, I think that both of them were wonderful. And I think, you know, if Oscars were being thrown around as they were, certainly that's the one that Burton deserved. Well, he missed so many of them, but that is absolutely the one that he really deserved.
Yes, interestingly, Albee initially wanted Bette Davis for the role of Martha. That's something to contemplate, isn't it?
That is indeed, but I think that might have been altogether too much.
There's a very fine American film theatre version of A Delicate Balance from maybe 1973 or something like that, with the dreamiest cast of all time, with Katharine Hepburn, Paul Schofield, and fantastic cameos by Joseph Cotton and Betsy Blair.
And indeed Lee Remick, who is...
Lee Remick is the much-married Julia.
In a very difficult role. She's absolutely stunning, I think.
Yes. Do you think they make them like that anymore? Edward Albee and Tennessee Williams? Are we going to see careers of such transformative longevity and...
Well, as I say, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Tony Kushner, who again started with such an amazing bang and has written some very interesting stuff since. But the problem is Broadway no longer really is a place for any sort of serious work, unless it's something that's brought over from London or has a film star in it. And, I mean, there are certainly playwrights out there, but it's a question of where their plays get put on. And I don't think playwrights are ever going to have that same sort of build-up as public figures as they had then.
Well, I was in New York before joining the tour in Washington and was struck by the paucity of straight drama. The productions that are running forever are clearly the musicals, whereas in the 60s something as radical, really, in tone and subject matter as Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf could run for a year and a half.
Yes.
But it's slim pickings now, really, isn't it? Well, Ian Dickson, thank you for talking to me about the great Albee, and we look forward to more updates along the way during ABR's first US tour.
Great.